And we are recording, just so everyone knows. Okay,
I don't have that.
that,
You ready? Where do you want me to stand?
you right, go back, right here.
Oh, wow. Good
Okay.
evening, everyone, and welcome to the May meeting of the Gene Winter chapter of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society, holding its meeting and lecture at the Danvers Historical Society's Capley Memorial Hall. Thank you, Danvers Historical Society, for allowing us the use of this facility. Tonight's speaker is Kim Smith, and I'll get to her intro in a second. First, I have to do my reminders. The first reminder is membership dues. The chapter membership dues of a whopping $6 is for this September through next May. The forms are in the back for those of you who are members of the chapter and you haven't gotten them yet. And they're due as soon as you can pay them. We're happy to get them anytime. And also, I encourage anyone who's not a member of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society to join. Membership forms are in the back as well. And those of you who aren't members of the Danvers Historical Society are to join that as well. I don't know if we have, do you have membership forms in the back, Dave? I'm sure that Laura can find it.
It should be on the stand up.
The next sort of item I wanted to report on is we will be meeting in the fall. Our first meeting will be September 19th. I just checked my calendar to make sure we're going back to our normal schedule, though we'll still be here for the fall. The PVD will not be ready probably through the fall, and may not be ready in the spring. I was hoping Ryan would be here to still update on their reconstruction, but evidently they started work on the elevator, which is a critical item in their building. Let's see, so with that, if anyone has suggestions for speakers, please let us know. John Kalakis is our program chair. And also should introduce Lindsay Randall as our vice chair. And Dick Miller is online, I believe, is our treasurer. With that, let me introduce our speaker tonight. It's Kim Smith, and I've been with him for a while. This is a grad student, probably. She's going to talk about way offshore archaeological studies in support of offshore wind on the Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf. This is a topic near and dear to my heart as well. We're both paid to do this. Well, not this talk tonight. So maybe she should be paid. What I want to give you a little bit about Kim's background, like myself, she's also worked in both terrestrial archaeology as an undergrad and maritime archaeology as a grad student. She's got an MA from the University of Eastern Carolina University, where many of the people in our field have been trained, not me. So I have a very close friend, so guilt by association. She's currently the Senior Cultural Resources Specialist with HDR Incorporated, which is an environmental consulting firm doing a lot of work, I think nationwide, if I understand. So, in fact, I think we talked about some earlier today, working in a lot of other countries. She's a qualified marine archaeologist for BOEM. So that's a certain level of knowledge that allows you to work on these offshore projects. Prior to going to HDR, she was the regional manager and senior project and principal investigator for Gray and Page, which is another consulting firm. With that, I'm going to hear from you. You want to add any introduction? Be happy to.
Thanks everyone for having me, and Vic, thanks for roping me into this.
Believe me, yes, right.
I think both of you tagged me, so it's all right. I'm excited. So a little bit more about me. Yes, I am both a terrestrial and a marine archaeologist, as some people have once put it to me. I'm amphibious. I still do both, actually. I work on land and offshore. I have about 22 years of what we call cultural resource management or consulting archaeology experience. And I am going to get into the weeds a little bit on that and what that looks like, because I'm not a purely academic archaeologist. I specifically work for developers, for projects to get them through permitting, through development, through construction. So just a very quick brief agenda. I want to outline why are we talking about offshore wind in general? What's that energy market look like right now? Then a little bit of a cultural resource regulatory environment. I know there's a lot of remarks, but I'll explain about the federal and state guidelines and regulations that require the work I do and why I do it. And then what the studies look like. I have these three things up here, the Harvey, Tara, and Lara. They stand for different things: historical resource, visual effects assessment, the terrestrial archaeological resource assessment, and the marine archaeological resource assessment. But we like to abbreviate everything, so I talk the Harvey, Tara. So why are we here talking about wind in general? The United States does have a goal to hit 30 gigawatts of wind, offshore wind by 2030. We doubled down in a way and said that not only are we going to be 30 gigawatts of regular offshore wind, we're now going to also have 15 gigawatts of floating offshore wind. The difference being positioning in certain depths. A lot of the traditional offshore wind is in more shallow, slightly more near shore waters, where floating offshore wind is done in deeper waters. Right now, we have 42 megawatts in the water, and as a Rhode Island resident, I'm happy to say that's in Rhode Island, in Lock Island, wind that is actually functional. But we have 2 additional wind farms that should be coming online in the next 2 years or so. Public knowledge through BOEM. Vineyard Wind 1 is through permitting and through an MOA and ROD, and so is South Fork. So beyond that, we have all these things that are called lease areas, these large masses of acreage offshore that the Bureau of Ocean Energy manages, and they put them out for lease for people to develop for offshore wind. We have a lot of areas in Massachusetts wind energy area. We have off of New York called the New York Bight. We have these areas off of the Carolinas, the Mid-Atlantic, and also on the West Coast, on California as earlier this year. But we're continuing to look at areas such as the Gulf of Maine will be coming online. So will the Gulf of Mexico, Oregon, additional work in the Central Atlantic and elsewhere. So kind of talking back to that, we have 31 projects currently in development along the Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf that means here on the eastern seaboard from Maine all the way down to the Carolinas. It's a huge industry. There's a lot of this. So that's a lot of work. All of this requires archaeology. We are part of the federal permitting compliance. And here's a nice image that does show those. On the right-hand side here, the little bubble up towards Rhode Island and Massachusetts, that's the Massachusetts wind energy area. All the different colors of the different lease blocks. There are different developers that don't know when they get to determine what their project looks like within those. We come down, we have the New York Bight, there is parts along the Carolinas, all the way down to the Carolina Long Bay is the furthest one down on the south. Still in the works of being developed, but it's been sold for lease. And then we have the ones there in Virginia on the picture. On the other side, we have the California lease sales. So they're relatively recent. And this kind of just shows you what BOEM puts out there is, when they hold these auctions at the end, you have these provisional winners, who wins them, what's the dollar signs. So again, it's a pretty big production. Not only is it a lot of money to win these lease sales, it's a lot of money to do. And again, not just to get the wind turbines up and other things, it's to get through an entire permitting process as well, which archaeology. And I always like to say, I'm not talking about onshore ports and marine infrastructure. That's a whole other facet of this industry that requires a significant amount of archaeology as well. Image there on the right shows the 9 current onshore ports and infrastructure that is being constructed in this list. So a lot of these you'll see are in New England because we had one of the earliest lease sales with the Massachusetts wind energy area, which is why you'll see projects like Vineyard Wind 1 and South Fork coming online first, Lock Island earlier. So a lot of these ports will develop to help support this growth. It takes a lot of industry. Someone's got to build cables, someone's got to build vessels to get the people out there and construct these projects. So it's a lot. So with that said, moving away from just the industry as a whole, I said that archaeology is part of a process. For BOEM, and this is something I usually like these visuals. On the far left-hand side, you all kind of talks about they're looking at these lease areas. They develop their internal documentation of what is it feasible. They do wind assessments, like how much wind is it going to be worthwhile for anyone to buy or borrow into these leases. They do environmental studies. They'll do archaeological or cultural studies at that point. They get through to the lease, they figured out it is feasible, now we're gonna put these out for a lease sale. Developers will bid on them, they'll win their leases, and then from there, in the first few years, they have a site assessment plan that they have to follow. Again, it has an archaeology aspect, it has a whole bunch of environmental. They put out net ocean buoys that kind of sit on the seabed, and it gathers a bunch of like wave data, maybe benthic, different vegetation on the seafloor, what are the marine mammals, a whole bunch of data. They synthesize that, and then they start to develop what their plan looks like. How do they want to build out a wind farm? So where are they going to put these wind turbines? And that gets you through this construction and operations plan. That's the design aspect. They're determining what is going to be constructed. So for archaeology, all of this work falls for us under federal regulations. And I am kind of belaboring this because I feel like a lot of times we have academic talks, but we are very much tied to regulations, and we're a consultant archaeologist. So we're tied to the National Environmental Policy Act and the National Historic Preservation Act. There are clean water permits through the Army Corps. There's the Archaeological Resources Assessments Act, and then there's also various state and local regulations or permits that get integrated into the process that may require archaeology to be done. And I took this picture, it was so cool. I wanted to walk by it in October. It was one of the transfer vessels, by the way, are built here in North America, transferring people out to climb up those wind turbines. I mean, that's pretty precarious, and you have to train a lot of people to do that too. So I was out there and I had this not a picture. Not something you see all the time. So real quick about archaeology through the National Historic Preservation Act. That's our biggest, what we call, you'll probably hear it's called Section 106. That's our biggest, that's how archaeology is involved in most projects, transmission, offshore wind, road construction, different things like that. There's a very formal process. We have that over here on the right-hand side. We initiate, we have consultations with tribes, with local agencies, with state historic preservation offices. We try to identify the resources in good faith. And then we assess what is the potential for effect. Are they significant resources? Are they eligible for the National Register? And if so, are they going to be affected or destroyed through this process? And if so, we resolve those effects. So it's a very formulaic process for one project. And I say that knowing that this slide is mixed. We do use a slightly different twist in offshore wind where that process is kind of folded in. I don't need to get into details on this, but normally on the left-hand side, it shows how the two processes kind of run together side by side. And boom, knowing that there's a lot of these offshore wind projects. Remember, I told you there's 31 of these going on in the eastern coast alone. To kind of streamline this process, they folded the two Section 106 and National Environmental Policy Act together. So it's under a NEPA substitution. The other thing that I do like to point out is we have federal guidelines to follow to Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the OGREP office, Office of Renewable Energy Programs, has very particular guidelines as to how you conduct your archaeology. So if it's on terrestrial, they'll talk about when and how you do shovel tests. If it's offshore, we're looking at geophysical surveys, so that kind of guides how you let that survey guidelines for if you're going to have 30 meters spacing 15 meters, 90 meters, 31. So to get into the detail, what is an offshore wind project look like? There's a lot of components to these projects. Offshore, on the Outer Continental Shelf, we have the wind turbines. There's various different foundations for them. They can be single pole, like shown here. They can have a jacket, kind of dressed up like the one I showed you with the vessel transfer. It had a slightly different face to it. All of those are different. They're different options. So that's the wind turbines themselves. They're going to go into the ground. Anywhere it's going to go into the seabed is considered a disturbance for archaeology to consider. Then we have in between the turbines, there's these little interarray cables. They're going to connect turbines together to get all the power and then bring it and deliver it to the offshore substation, which is the next thing there. From there, they're going to take all that energy again, they're going to put it into one, mostly one, sometimes more than one, but traditionally one export cable. And they're going to take that on land. So there's a near shore, onshore environment. Traditionally, we bring them onto the beaches, either through drilling underneath the beach. So you're not seeing a big open cut. But in some cases, we do a large trench open cut and bring the cable on. That's determined by geotechnical engineers. It's well outside of my wheelhouse, but they'll tell you why a certain way is necessary so that the cable's not re-exposing itself. So from there, it also goes into a local substation and then it connects to the grid so it can go to the homes. So everywhere that this disturbance of the seabed or on the land is occurring, that's somewhere we have to consider for our. That's what we define as the area of potential. And I did want to show this. It shows the different types of turbine structures, the monopole, the jacketed, and then the various types of floating winds that we'll start seeing. And even the floating wind, you'll see it has kind of anchoring points, right? It's going to float, but it still has to anchor to something. And that will be part of it. All right, so what are we talking about for cultural resources? For archaeology or cultural resources, we're looking at archaeological sites. We're looking at historic buildings. We definitely have to consider historic standing structures, the visual effects on those things, cemeteries. But we're also talking about traditional cultural properties or traditional cultural landscapes of tribes. Sometimes it's not an archaeological site, but it's a place. And then part of our consideration is talking about the significance or how important an archaeological site is. Finding, say, one flake maybe isn't as significant or as important as a place where we clearly have repeated levels of occupation and better understanding of people throughout time. All right. So with all the jargon set up, we do go into a process. We have those historic resource visual effects assessments. We have terrestrial archaeological resource assessments, and we have marine archaeological resource assessments. Each one of these does take a phased approach. We do our consultations with tribes to understand if there are significant areas or landscapes of importance up front. We also do what we would consider an early constraints analysis. We have state historic preservation offices. We have museums. We have the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. We have people that know of different archaeological sites or resources that we talk to well before development to have an understanding of what is there or what may be there. We often do consultations just within a community to ask. And then from there, it can go on to what we understand as a traditional archaeological. For example, on the bottom slide, I have a picture of metal detecting, depending on what a project may look like. It may be important to do metal detecting. On the top, we have kind of the traditional excavations, larger 1 by 1 meter block excavations, when we know that there is an archaeological. I'm going to touch so briefly quick on the visual effects. For all of these projects, the wind turbines are visible across the landscape. We will have GIS modelers look at how far visible each turbine is on the landscape. A lot of these wind farms range anywhere from 13 miles and beyond offshore. So they are able to look at the arc of the body of the earth and kind of make these models as to how visible or the point on the landscape. So if you're in a historic building, can you see it? And is that significant? Does it affect the resource? Is it a problem that you can see it? Or is it just kind of like anything else, a new structure? So they do take that into consideration. So we have amazing historic architectural historians that I work with across various projects. And this is their specialty. I am not an architectural historian. And then we do have a terrestrial archaeological component. For terrestrial archaeology, remember this is the cable coming on land, tying into substations and power lines on land. This is very traditional, what probably seen for a lot of the various talks here, that we go out there and we do a shovel test. So so we're getting these smaller 50 by 50 square holes, we're screening the soils. We're still talking with the tribes. We have tribal monitors and use them definitely on site. And from there, we take any materials back to a lab, we wash, analyze, and then do a technical. For a lot of these, we will try to recommend avoidance. Something I should always say for all archaeology, we really try to recommend rerouting or moving around. Not just for us, but for everyone involved. We really don't want to disturb or destroy archaeological sites at all costs. They are a non-renewable resource. Once you've dug into it, it's gone in perpetuity. Just a little bit of images of what traditional archaeology was. So on to the more fun stuff. So from the marine aspect, we're looking at the Outer Continental Shelf. This image on the left-hand side shows us these lease areas, as I showed earlier. And it was very early on in the process. I'm looking at database information. I'm looking at NOAA has mapped shipwrecks, Bellum has mapped shipwrecks that they're aware of. It doesn't mean that they're all included. We try to map all this out. These little squiggly lines. This is coming out of the Hudson River. And that's the Hudson River Canyon Valley that is still pretty visible, even though it's all underwater. You can still see it in the back imagery today. But all these other squiggly lines are what we consider as okay, sure. Throughout time, through glaciation, deglaciation, we have various shorelines visible within our lakes. So we pull a lot of this data together. This is useful for developers to recommend avoidance up front. It's also good for maybe going to be sale if the developer realizes that there's significant landforms like some shorelines or the south coming right through their lease block. Maybe they want to go for another lease area, because these are all things to consider right away. So for marine archaeological resource assessments, we are not diving. Diving is actually quite unsafe in many regards, especially on the Outer Continental Shelf. So we're using a suite of high-resolution geophysical surveys. We're using side scan sonar. We're using gradiometer or magnetometers. We're using the sub-bottom profilers, and we're using multi-beam echo sounder. So this suite kind of tells us different things. It looks at the image of the seabed itself today, or the moment that that image is taken. It looks at what is the magnetic signature at the seabed or slightly below. So looking at the seabed itself, we might see if there's something visible on the seabed. Looking at the magnetic signature, we might know if there's something magnetic either right there on the seabed or maybe slightly buried, but it kind of gives an idea that there's some sort of metallic or ferrous object there. Sub-bottom profilers are excellent because they give us a nice profile of the seabed and beautiful like images. If you cut a wall in archaeology on shore, on land, some of those profile images I showed earlier, you can clearly see the different deposits of soil. This would show us very similar image below seabed, and then multiple echo sounder also shows us a nice image of the seabed as well. Giving a little bit of information here on the right-hand side, we have an image of side scan sonar. Some of these are taken from the region. Those are nice. The side scan here, you can kind of see the sand waves and rippling. You can clearly see boulder fields in these if they're out there. If you do have run into what we call paleolandscape, sometimes you can actually see parts of that in the side scan sonar as well, margins of things that show that there's a different infilling. And then on the left-hand side, we have our magnetic data. That is pretty stable. It's up a little bit, but that shows that there's not really anything of concern there. We would have a dipole, so it would go up and down, or you can have a spike go up or a spike go down. When we start to see those signatures, that's when we're interested. We're curious if there's what's there, what else is there. Looking at the side scan sonar, this is an example of what is probably a shipwreck that was identified. The scale is not great, but you can see on the side scan sonar over here, it's just this little blend. But on the left-hand side, we have the contours, the positive and the negatives. So there are ways in which we approach, looking at magnetic signatures and looking at the side scan to determine if it's a shipwreck, is it a potential shipwreck. Sometimes we find lobster traps or other just fish traps or just random paraphernalia that's out there on the seabed. And if we're uncertain, we would mark it as potential cultural resource and still recommend an avoidance measure around. Or if we could, we would send down ROVs as well, maybe if they're a problem. But the next thing, besides looking for shipwrecks, looking at the paleolandscape, using it geology, pulling it together using geological approaches into archaeology, using geomorphology, geoarchaeology. We know that about anywhere from 22,000 plus years ago, up to 3,000, maybe even more recent. A lot of what we know as the sea and the ocean today on the Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf was land, visible land. A lot of the water was taken up, it was held up with the glacier. So this was traversable lands by people. We have, this kind of shows like various ice sheets coming down through. We have different moraines, glacial moraines, looking again in geology. But it's been pretty well studied and passed by strictly geology, and archaeologists today are applying these geologic principles and testing it offshore. One of the things that I like to show is that I have this looking at sea level rise maps, about 24,000 years ago. It's all land mass, it's all orange, right? Then around 18,000 years ago, during glaciation and anti-glaciation, we have the development of these larger glacial lakes. They're ponded. That's what these little blue blobs are. So glacial lake islands formed right in front of the glaciers. And the landmass is still there to the south, but we have it's separated by large lakes. Just like people today, we like different lakes, we like water resources, we have a habit as humans to want to constantly live in the same areas. We like to go to the beach, we like to make sure we have access to clean water. We like to make sure we have access to food, shellfish or what have you. Sometimes there's particularly resources like different wood or say stone material for making projectile points or whatever is needed as well, or bone for making weapons as well. There's different reasons that we continuously go to the same spots then. And as we continue this trajectory, we look at about 14,000 years ago. Glaciers have retreated. We have landmass again. 12,000, we have sea level rise slowly occurring to the south. $12,000 years ago, coming up, 8,000. And around 6,000 and 3,000. Around 3,000, we start to see what we know of today for the coastline, standard and Cape and. But I find it interesting, these are things to think about as we look through some of this. We have different features forming, we have different shoals that are formed. Part of this growth process with sea level rise, we have isostatic rebound, the glaciers are moving, sediment is lifting up. You have different water fluctuations, and you have different deltaic marine deposits. We'll get into here. The image here on the right hand side kind of shows it pretty well. This is specifically for the New York fight to the we have the glaciation on the bottom. You have this delta. You have this large coastal plain. You have all the different rivers and streams kind of going out to what was then the shoreline, so on the bottom. Then the next one up, you start to see with isostatic rebound, some infilling, we have sea level rise in the next one. Some of these areas that were once river valleys or channels, small streams, they're covered now with water. But what we also know is that while marine transgression and sea level rise occurred in some places very rapidly, it kind of turns up the sand and everything that we see today. We also know in other areas it happened either rapidly enough that it preserved or slow enough that it wasn't a very strong environment to mix up these sediments and these channels. So while they're no longer clearly able to follow ocean or follow the river through the ocean, under the seabed, we can still see this data. It's clear in the size or the sub-bottom data, and it's being tested for these arrival. So this is an example of the sub-bottom data when I'm talking about. They're hard to see, and I apologize a bit for that. The top gray image, all those darker horizons, that's usually an indication of kind of like different deposits, sediment, maybe clay, it's a harder read. But these are all kind of different fabulas or different states. These are different old stream valleys that are traversing this single landscape here. That scale is about 750 meters. So there's quite a bit of like a big stream valley and meandering valley going through here. And not only did it go here at one time in the past, It's been in size, it's cut by other streams, so it's been constantly doing this, repeating itself over time, infilling, degrading some areas and preserving others. Then on the bottom left-hand side, we have this larger probable bed that we can see. It's harder to read in some of this data, but again, with supplementary data to have provided for us. Which is what we do. So trying to identify these what we call submerged landforms is that we take this sub-bottom data. There's multiple data sets. You probably see by now that there's different features. And part of it's also post-processing, but you can use different multi-panel, single panel, or sometimes it gets better and have to be fine for the different pieces of equipment, it's better. Let me just try to do it better. But what we do is we look at the sub-bottom data itself, profile. We also map out all of these different, all these different squiggles that we see in that profile, and we measure those. What is the depth? See there, where is it at? What's the extent? What's the depth of it? And we create these contours. So on the right-hand side of the contour, using the data from the sub-bottom, we get this, and we kind of start to see what's going on. And that red line that's showing there is the physical bisection line in which that visual image is showing. So you took that and you applied it. That is your bisection line. That is the actual profile for that. So contouring these features does help us understand what is there. It also helps us understand the extent of some of these features, both horizontally and vertically. But then the other thing that we want to do, if we can, is that we like to take about something. We like to do what we call ground truth, and we do it in terrestrial archaeology for geophysical surveys. On terrestrial, we'll do a geophysical survey, often see if there's a cemetery there, but we'll still scrape back the topsoil to see the features. We don't really have that luxury offshore. It's really hard to feature straight off the seabed. But instead, we have this 5 or 4 technique, where we take one of these cores and we choose on that profile where we want to put it so that we can test what the soil looks like at a very particular point on that profile. So this is, we come in, there's a bunch of bone usually there. Anywhere from 3 to 6 meters long, we cut 1 meter lengths to make them more manageable. We'll bring back to the lab. We'll cut them in half, and then we'll use the morphological analyses, we'll take my cells, put colors on, we'll look for what is the texture. And for this particular strip, microphone here, you'll see working from the top to the bottom, from the right to left, you see marine sediments. It's a little mucky in there, a little bit, and that orangey coloring also gets into more of what we would traditionally see on sub-aerial structure. So looking at these, you'll see the various ranges. If it's marine sediment cells, like sand, we look for community deposits as usually an indication that these are old estuaries, or maybe it's part of the form. We see metal ponds offshore, we see the remnants, we definitely see remains. And then we see the delta, so pretty much all of the traditional stream features that we look for. And this ground. So as I said, for this, for example, what I was saying, trying to ground truth, each one of these little arrows is where, for archaeology, we're curious. We wanted to look at what the deposits look like, particularly along this feature. We identify testing the upper margins of each of these features. These are kind of known areas where normally we're not living in the streams, we're not living in rivers, but we're living along the upper margins, or we're camping along the upper margins, or going to fish along them. So we're looking at those upper margins to see what is the sediment look like there, but are there investments in archaeological materials. Then we're kind of testing more to the inside of them sometimes, also to gather important information on quality, to bring shells and everything that we can understand. What did this look like? What is the ecology? What does the environment look like at a particular time? In which we would also send out any carbon material for radio date, so it would tell us a very finite point in time. And we test throughout that. Yeah. beyond that, this is a huge process. We look at this for all of these projects. For the wind farms, we're looking at, again, where the wind turbines are, where the interlay cables are. We're following that entire cable corridor into the near shore. And all of that is applied the same geophysical method. So we're using that suite of instrumentation, we side scan stuff on mag, and multi-beam for all of this. We're running these at 15 or 30 meter intervals, 15. You're in Massachusetts state waters, Belleville regulations are at 30 meters. So we're making sure that we have really good overlap so that if something happens in an instrument as it's going on one direction, we still have 100% coverage as it's kind of that, so that we really have some pretty good substantive data. And just to kind of give you the scale of this, for one project from Marine Archaeological Assessments, most of us can talk terabytes now with hard drives and phones are maybe like 600 megabytes, but a lot of this data can be almost 8 terabytes of data for one project, and that's just for the marine archaeological geophysical data, not any other supplemental images or anything. So they're pretty substantial projects that we're involved with. We map all this out. All of this data does get formally reported. It gets consulted with tribes, it goes to the state historic preservation offices, it goes to the water archaeological resource. There's discussions, and then ultimately we try to avoid one. That's why for the submerged landforms, having some level of is helpful. So we can also determine what are the depths of the seabed for these feeders, and the cable can be made up 2 meters, but the feeders until 4 meters below seabed. You might have some ability to work with that cable without affecting this land level. So ultimately, like I said, we do a report for the Harvey Marsh. We have different consultations with them. We do develop monitoring plans both onshore and offshore. Traditionally, we do have some level of ability plan for the offshore and onshore too. So we're doing some level of additional supplementary archaeological studies as the project goes through construction. And then we have the legal documents and memorandums with the different federal agencies. So with that said, yeah. The first thing that we're always going to do is recommend. So that's why for me it's important to know what people where that landform. If you can shift the table to the right and avoid the landform, or maybe we can raise the table there style. For if there is a chance that we can put a lot of forms done in concentration. So that means we talk with the sides, we talk with the shippers, we talk with the and we work together to figure out what is the mitigation goal, right? So mitigation is never a one for anything. It's definitely done in consultation and what the affected party or stakeholder wants out of it. So, and that. Good question. No, we were definitely doing it before to some extent. I definitely did a significant amount of work in Mexico for oil and gas projects, and then also underground studies. We were cognizant that these landforms were out there. Ball and Bessie, so our sister agency, did require these types of studies to some extent for oil and gas, but I would say all this is done again, and I will keep echoing that consultation through conversations with the tribes, through conversations with state historic preservation officers. There was more of an awareness of this, so it definitely came online for every requirement of the offshore from the beginning. It's written into the record.
Can you just repeat the questions for people?
So are we preserving it for historical or ecological? I would say both. There's definitely an ecological aspect to it. Obviously, this is kind of project I cannot speak to. For preservation for cultural, historic, we always say preservation is best if possible, right? Again, it's a non-renewable resource. We can't go put the soil back exactly the way it was. So we always will recommend. I don't know if it would really affect currents, but it just may affect different, when you turn up different seabed environments, it can affect environments, and then, or fish in different activities or seagrasses or whatnot. But then from a cultural perspective, a lot of these landforms, mind you, but if we went back to the sea level rise, this is land mass, you know, between 24,000 and 3,000 years ago. This is traditional cultural landscapes for tribes. This is their ancestral lands. And there's places, on one of my images earlier, there's a visual looking at over like the Hudson River. You know, there are places that are important to people in time throughout history. And this offshore environment is one of them. It may be underwater today, but it doesn't mean it's no less important. And I should state that to date, in the work I've been involved with, we have not found an archaeological site, but it doesn't matter because they are traditional cultural properties or traditional cultural.
We just have a question from online, sort of related to what you just said. But in the cores, have you ever found any artifacts or know anyone who have found artifacts or just anything that's weird?
So, and of course, we have not found artifacts to date. I won't speak for everyone. I don't know if anyone else has. I know in oil, gas, the Gulf of Mexico, they've definitely identified shell bins this way. When they pull the core up and they have a whole bunch of shell, right? And I imagine they probably have recovered artifacts in that case as well. But the particular work I've done, no. And weird, no, but a lot of stinky shellfish, you know, when you go to open that core about, a month later, it just stinks up the lab. So
Okay.
sometimes you do find woody deposits, and that's, for me, it's kind of fun because we'll try to send that out for radiocarbon dating. So we'll find a random piece of wood or something, get approval to radiocarbon date that, whether it's, it's not archaeological or cultural significance, but having that additional radiocarbon date helps us understand the environment throughout time and history and understand when that deposit or that soil or sediment was or last seen.
Which one? Just to get back to your original question, is this, we're just doing this, we've been doing this for 30 years. Every table that goes out there, if it's for communications, LNG in the Northeast, dredging for harbors, dredging channels, it's surveyed. Unfortunately, not at this scale, and these parameters have evolved, get tighter as we learn more, we change them. That's why the state parameters are much stricter than foam parameters. It's also shallower water, more likely to be preserved. And as far as artifacts, I haven't seen an artifact yet either.
No.
It's not modern. I've seen modern material come up with it,
Yeah.
but not very deep. And wood is very common, and it's not necessarily an artifact from a human point of view. It's an artifact of that landscape of that environment at the time it was collected.
We've definitely gotten a lot of PD material. So. Yes.
Question about the native landscape. And the leases and the finances. Did many people get any sort of a portion of that lease from finance exchange, and where do you go? Because who knows who the people live around?
That is BOEM's job to work with the tribes to figure out. We, through section 106 or NEPA substitution, we have government to government consultation. BOEM is the government agency, and the tribes, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, THPO, is a government agency, so they consult together. So that is usually well outside of what I do as a consultant. They have conversations. They talk about how to go. I can't speak to what they do or don't yet. I really can't. It's not been my experience to be involved in those conversations, as I don't work for a federal agency. So. Yeah.
It's this ecological study, a historical study, unique to the United States or something global?
No, it's definitely something they're doing for a lot of the offshore winds. Maybe, if anything, I think maybe the U.S. is a little more strict on some of its survey guidelines, but you can look up like the Dogger winds in England, and there's a classic case of They identified their submerged forests and archaeological sites in between England and France in the Doggerland area as a result of a wind farm, probably about, I don't know, 15 years ago. So that's the interesting thing, is that a lot of the applications of offshore wind development from Europe is being applied here. They've been doing it far longer than we have. We're taking kind of their lessons learned and applying over here.
So in this particular kind of project, I'm starting out with multiple alternatives and through the environmental process, coming to a preferred alternative.
Okay, so I'll echo the question. The question is if we are using a multiple alternative approach, and no, we're not. But what we're doing instead of having a constrained area of potential effects, we're looking at what we call a project design envelope. So we're already working with a larger area that allows for constructability regardless within. So rather than a cable corridor, we know the trench is only going to be 2 meters wide and like 2 meters deep. Some of these cable corridors that we're surveying and investigating are upwards of 800 meters wide, so that we have room to work around either shipwrecks, boulders, benthic, seagrass, what have you. So it's specific to the offshore wind industry, and it's called the project design envelope, although I am seeing that applied to solar as well.
The lines they can start, they can talk about the they go to the well and to the Kelvin in France and say, what's your opinion, or is this a typical wiki mentality in America of we gotta go to country and ask them about something that has nothing to do with them?
No, actually, UNESCO has some very strong heritage laws. They do a certain level of consultation too with the various cultures and countries. So they definitely do a consultation process. That you might, I don't know if you have experience with that. The very basic that yes, we do consultations.
Yeah, I don't have experience with that, but it tends to be a lot more investment into looking at the data collectively. Not just
Yeah,
like
it's a
we do it as a
collaborative.
collective. They look at it broadly, and in fact, Dargaland and a lot of the Southern English Channel and North Sea is actually paid for through money from aggregate development, not new development. So they're doing a lot of extracting sands and gravels. And those are the same concept, large areas. But those developers, their data, the British government actually paid them the data to analyze collectively so they could then do this next step, go and find the sites.
I do recommend, you can Google Doggerlands and see different aspects, and they have some really nice models where they show what the landscape kind of looks like, and it's pretty impressive. Yeah.
As far as jurisdiction, how far out on the continental shelf does the state of Massachusetts claim ownership of the seabed? And does the U.S. government claim dual ownership of it, or they go further out?
3 miles.
3 miles?
3 miles for state waters.
Nautical.
3 nautical miles. Yeah.
There is a couple of comments in here. One is, or sort of jointly, is that there were submerged archaeological sites in Rhode Island, Greenwich Bay, and then off the west side of Block Island, and one of them was sort of a heart.
Yes.
of-
David Robinson's research.
Okay.
Dave's done-
No, well, I don't think, it is DSR, so maybe that is Dave Robinson, if that's you, so sorry.
Significant amount of your.
And then just for people on here, I don't think he's here, but also for everyone else, when she is talking about the side scan sonar, one of our chapter members, Marty Klein, actually created side scan sonar when he was at MIT. So this has deep connections to particularly the Gene Winter chapter and everything. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knows about that. And if I had known that this was Dave Robinson, and if you're not Dave Robinson, then I am so sorry. But if you are, I'm sorry I actually asked your, or said your comment and everything.
No, that was good to point out.
You gotta give him a hard time.
There are significant amount of near shore and immediate adjacent to shore archaeological sites that are definitely bound with our, but any offshore, further offshore, we have not found material to even off the coast of Florida, there was 5 years ago, they definitely found archaic burials offshore, tested for sure, burials. In the Gulf of Mexico, there's a significant amount of shell middens that are found offshore. If, again, back to those images of the sea level rise.
So
you know,
no
this land's-
Atlantis.
This land, no Atlantis, although I read something about a really nice old stone pathway recently was identified. So I don't know, yeah. Oh, the biminies, so yeah, for sure. But if you remember, you know, this land mass was much larger, you know, a long time ago. There were people out there living there, resource extraction, they were camping, they were following family, they were hunting animals, right? So these are very large landscapes that not that long ago were land.
And as much as fishermen are constantly bringing up mastodon tusks and teeth in their dredge nets, you gotta believe that there are people out there too.
Of course, yeah, the main lobstermen definitely find materials in the Gulf of Maine, the Corleone collection off the coast of New Jersey, where they pulled up the projectile point with mammoth material, so absolutely. Yeah,
I'm just wondering, what's the depth? Look at the and how far out it goes. What's that depth?
like the extent, miles.
Well, miles and really way more than that.
Yeah, I was like, it's, yeah, it's significant.
Yeah, no.
I haven't really totally looked at
When I was a kid, we were fishing with my father's boat up by Egg Rock, 160 feet from land now. So it's deep.
Well, I know it goes very deep, so I'm wondering. Yeah.
next time I'll look it up. I never actually really looked at that, but we definitely look at, you know, various environmental factors, the sea level rise, the back on the tree lines, and kind of modeling all that. That image, I should say, they're not perfect, and we'll keep refining that as we collect additional data, and we do more radiocarbon data and analysis, but for now, that's something we're working on. Yeah.
In the instance where you come across. Because of chlorine. I think we automatically go.
Yeah, what we try to map the whole landscape. I definitely try to work with the contour of it. I want to know where it is immediately, where's the top, upper parts of it, below seabed, but what are the deeper parts too? I want to know as much as I can about this landform in totality, map that out. We recommend overarching total avoidance if possible, but just like some of the HDD drilling underneath archaeological sites, like if we can put cable sometimes in deeper parts of it where it's not affecting the actual land itself, and just kind of the marine sands that have overlaid the original deposits. That's one way to recommend. So it's kind of, it's looking at a lot of data sets, the depth and breadth of these features and how we can link cables without affecting as much as possible. But some of these features they're large, right? They're taking up maybe the entire export cable route pathway. You're not avoiding, and then we go to consultation. What are we doing next? Yeah.
You mentioned open trenches, somehow you put things in open trenches, is that also on land?
Yeah, they'll be, that's what I'm saying. When they come from the offshore environment and they're coming into the beaches, we don't like to do open cut. No one likes to do open cut. It's kind of harsh to see. A lot of times they will try to do an HDD underneath, and you'll never see that cable except for an exit pit on land, and offshore will have an entry pit. Yeah, yeah, always HDD. But yes, so directional drilling. There are cases where the feasibility of doing an HDD is not possible, whether the sediment, the matrix or something, it's just not going to work for the geotech, the engineers for laying that cable. And they will do on the beach a large, just like you can imagine, a large open cut. They'll open it up, trench it, put the cable in, backfill.
Oh, they back up, so it's not actually.
No, not will never be visible, but there is a period where it's open, right? Where, you know, on a directional drilling, you'll just have an entry and exit pit that's kind of open. It minimizes hazard
And vandalism.
and vandalism.
About the various poles, of foaming versus different places.
A lot of that is determined by the engineers and what the substrate or the geology is, what can it handle. Whether it's rock, how far can it drill, is there any obstruction? The floating wind is highly recommended for depths that are far deeper, we're looking at 20 feet or 120 feet of depths, really significant depths. You're not gonna do a monopole down, that gets really tricky, you have so much weight, things that are outside of my wheelhouse, I'm an archaeologist, not here. But the monopole versus jacketed, as far as I'm concerned, really comes down to design constructability using. There's nothing to do with the I imagine like Brad, you know. I was like, yeah, I don't, this is well outside of my wheelhouse, so. But I'm trying to learn. It is a lot of good questions, and I don't know how much of it is also just supply and demand, you know, with a monopole without the jacket is less material. So, and I do know that as the turbines are much larger ones today than we had even 5 years ago. So I'm sure we'll just keep seeing design changes as that. So. Yep. Is it just a sudden well, in some areas, yeah, it does kind of cut off pretty quickly. You have a deeper ocean. So, yeah.
It's not the Marianas Trench though, so.
I mean, I can't attest to everywhere. I can say out here, yes, there are some areas where you quickly see a cut off with the slope, and it just goes extreme depth. In the Gulf of Mexico, the same thing. So we'll get out, and it is there's a clear cut edge in many areas. It's just drastic. Yeah.
A lot of fisheries, fishing rods are using the shoal before you get the drop off of the cliff.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you're doing. 1,000, 2,000 feet.
Probably. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that matches pretty well with what we're seeing, probably. We would consider that towards the you know, some of this on the Outer Continental Shelf, we call it like glacial maximum shorelines, you know, various terminology that's used, but kind of indicating that's kind of the terminus of where the land is in ancient oceans. Yeah. They're working on it. Yes, there are some. New Bedford definitely opened up their port to work towards that. I know Great Point's trying to come along with a cable. I do know that a significant amount of turbine materials and the offshore substation materials are still being manufactured in France and coming over. I was in France in January. It was really neat to see some of the port infrastructure for that, but also just the sheer number of onshore wind farms they have. So they have the technology. So we are currently using them, but we're working on the work in progress.
Any other questions from online, anyone? Okay, well, thank you. And for everyone online and for here, we will see you in the fall. So.
And this will be